Hello, and welcome to another Clark University Major Spotlight. I'm your host, Jared Gibson-Faber. Today, I'm pleased to introduce you to Professor Hugh Manon. He's the Director of both Screen Studies and Media Culture and the Arts at Clark. Professor Manon, would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a professor of screen studies and I'm the director of the Media Culture and the Arts program. And I come at this, my own background is in film studies. And so I teach a lot on psychoanalytic theory as it relates to film studies. A lot of my research and publication is on film noir, which, if you're familiar with that, is a sort of 40s and 50s crime genre. And so my work is multimedia of its very nature because film tends to be a multimedia format. It involves people working on things like set design, cinematography, which is obviously an element of photography, music, script writing, and all that. And so it's already a sort of interdisciplinary medium. And so I'm quite kind of naturally a good fit for MCA as program director. And I teach I should also say I teach the MCA 101 course, which is something we can talk about later.
Awesome.
And so I really know this major. I was one of the two co-designers of the program, and I know this major top to bottom. So I look forward to taking some time and explaining it.
Awesome. Yeah, you're completely right. We're going to top to bottom it. So you mentioned that it's a pretty interdisciplinary major. And I think we find that with a lot of majors at Clark, like global environmental studies, environmental science itself is also one that I've heard is really interdisciplinary. So I don't think Clark is any stranger to having these sorts of interdisciplinary programs that bring classes in from a variety of spaces. So let's talk about that. So can you just give us an overview of the major, like where are classes pulled in from, what are some student experiences, maybe for first years in particular, like what sorts of classes will they be taking, enrolling in at Clark?
Sure, absolutely. So what we recommend is anyone who's even interested in MCA as an option, and I'll say flat out that often, I think it depends on the individual student, but often students come into Clark not knowing whether they want to go the MCA route, which is overtly interdisciplinary, or whether they want to go into one of the majors that's involved in MCA, which are screen studies, theater arts, studio art, art history, and music. So those are the 5 programs in visual and performing arts. And students who do work in MCA combine two or more of those programs in their work. So I think what happens at the very first stage is when you walk in the door at Clark, there's this question as to, do I want to go, for instance, screen studies and take Screen 101, or do I want to go the MCA route and take MCA 101, or do I want to try both? And very often students do take, 2 intro level courses right when they walk in the door. And so by taking those intro level courses, they can get a sense of what these majors are about and sort of make the decision later on as to where they're going to major. So really quickly, what we recommend when a student is interested in MCA as a major is to take MCA 101, which is called, the official title of the course is Introduction to the History, Theory, and Analysis of Media. It's a long title. And take that along with what is called a Media Production Workshop course. And there's a whole list of those that are available on the website. And those are production courses. So MCA 101 is a writing-based course. And we recommend that they take alongside that a production-based course. And that could be like Intro to Photography, Intro to Drawing, Intro to Video. And so by taking those 2 courses in parallel with one another, they can get a sense of whether MCA is for them, because MCA in equal parts, and this is something I want to stress again and again and again, in equal parts requires students to do work in, the sort of written, historical, theoretical side of things and the hands-on creative maker side of things.
That's awesome. It sounds like it prepares students for a variety of options after. It's not like just screen studies, just studio, or just theater. It's a variety of those.
That's 100% correct. Yeah.
Awesome. So I think I want to ask a little bit about, so you mentioned when students first come in, they have to decide if they want to take MCA 101 or some other introductory level courses. How do you as an advisor and as a professor help students kind of in that trajectory, in that path? Is there, do you have meetings, frequent discussions? How does that look for students?
Yeah, I mean, the discussion happens at various stages, and it could be anywhere from a summer email. And I'll say right now, anyone who's listening to this, who's interested in MCA, who's thinking of coming to Clark or has already decided that they're coming to Clark, immediately send me an email. We can back and forth a little bit. I can give you advice as to what courses you should take right off the bat, what courses are going to be offered down the line. Admissions does a wonderful job with this. I'm just there to help. If you want, if you want my advice on this, I'm more than happy to provide it. And so it can happen in that form. Also, when students show up on campus, I'll often get an email that says something like, I'm interested in talking about MCA 101. Can I come to your office hours? And we'll have a discussion face to face about which is a better fit. And often the advice that I give is take a 101 course in an area of interest to you that's not MCA 101, and then take MCA 101 maybe the second semester, and decide at the end of your first year which one is right for you. And students sometimes do decide first semester which one they want to take, or which major that they want to be part of, but often it takes longer than that for people to decide, and I think that's completely natural.
That's great. And I want to say two things. First, thank you for making yourself readily available in this medium. I think a lot of students are drawn to Clark by the community that is present here. And we definitely talk to prospective students about the level of camaraderie and community engagement, not just students have, but staff and faculty. So you offering yourself in a medium like this is just showing that. So it's great to kind of hear from a professor's mouth. And then also, two, I hope your inbox doesn't get too flooded with emails after this goes live.
Well, it's totally fine. And over the summer, I'm more, even more available to answer those sorts of questions. And yeah, I mean, I think, the thing that if students or if prospective students are most interested in figuring out what Clark's about, and maybe even in some cases without having the advantage of coming to campus, it's a very tight-knit campus. I mean, I know every single individual student in both the majors that I oversee personally. Like, these are people that I interact with on a day-to-day basis all the time. Clearly, people come to Clark because they want that sort of close person-to-person approach, which you sort of can't get. I went to a state school as an undergrad, and I fully understand the difference between a big state school and a small liberal arts institution, small-ish, I would say. And honestly, it's night and day in that regard. And there's advantages to both, unquestionably. But for people interested in that kind of close face-to-face relationship with their professors and with other students and so forth, Clark's just optimal.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. And I think, too, the community piece, the knowing your professors, the having connections is a big piece of going to a smaller liberal arts university. But a lot of people want to know, what sorts of skills they're going to be building, what sorts of competencies they will be acquiring. So I think in the context of MCA, can we talk a little bit about, what you, or not you, but the program focuses on when it's kind of in past the introductory, but now in taking agency over what you're doing, building skills, things like that. So can you kind of lay that out for us?
Absolutely. So this is, and we immediately get into this kind of gnarly matter of what MCA is all about, right? And so the thing that I said earlier about how MCA is a major for people who want to do the hard work of writing and reading about history and theory on one hand, and want to do creative hands-on production work on the other hand. Those are the people we want in MCA, and those are the people who thrive in the program. So you can't want to do, the major doesn't make sense for people who want to do one of those things at the exclusion of the other. So there are people who want to be purely historians, and there are ways we can do that, right? So screen study, you could do a purely historically oriented screen studies major at Clark. Or you could do a history major, frankly, at Clark, or a philosophy major, or an English major, right? But people who major in MCA want to do both the writing work and the hands-on production work. And so that's a critical thing. And they want to do production work and studies work that spans more than one area. So this is why MCA is so tough to explain to people. It's doubly complex in that way. So it's both history and theory and production, and it's usually two different areas at once. So for instance, people who are interested in, the classic example of this would be somebody who wants to write scores for films. So what is somebody who wants to write scores for films? Are they a musician composer, or are they a filmmaker, or are they some combination of the two? And the answer is they are in fact some combination of the two, but MCA is the major for those students so that they can study both screen studies, film studies related material, and ultimately music composition, music theory, music history. So this is the program for those majors. And so ultimately, yeah, I mean, I think The skills that people learn are frankly all over the map because they can doubly combine things in these different ways. But then at the end of the day, where their skills lie is in the realm of interdisciplinary work. So I think that that's the direction and I think people who hear that buzzword interdisciplinary, they either kind of get it or they don't. But interdisciplinary simply means melding or hybridizing two different areas that have not traditionally gone together. So music composition and film, well, that's been a thing for a while, obviously, but to sort of formalize that as part of a program at a university has not been a thing for a while. So this is a very new approach in that regard. So anything at all that you could imagine being interdisciplinary media work falls under the hood of MCA. And I would say especially new and upcoming media forms, and this is not a particularly new medium, but it's certainly a hot medium, which is podcasting. So people who want to do podcasting, MCA is their home. In fact, we had an honors MCA major last year, Liza French. If anybody's interested, they can look up her podcast, which was her honors project. It's called Namesake. It's on SoundCloud. It's excellent. I think it's a 3 or 4 episode podcast about people's first names. Have you heard it?
Yeah. Liza was an ambassador for our office. I always bring her up when I'm talking about MCA.
Yeah, so she was one of the 2 first people to declare the major, and just did this absolutely brilliant podcast as her honors project. And so, I think that's a good indicator of kind of a spot-on example of what people do as MCA work, because that's a totally new sort of hybrid. But there are also old forms of hybrid, and one of those would be something like a person who's got interests in still photography and cinematography. Well, cinematography is within the realm of film studies, still photography is in the realm of studio arts, and people combine those 2 things in MCA in ways that you could never do at a university that doesn't have that sort of, you could do it as a major minor, but this makes it not necessary to do the major minor. You can do it all within your single major.
Right, that's awesome. It almost sounds like the way that, when I'm explaining to students kind of early on in their college admission process, like what exactly a liberal arts education gets you. It gets you transferable skills and skills that come from a wide variety of spaces that you can bring with you to a wide variety of spaces after graduation. It almost sounds like MCA is like the perfect liberal arts major, in that it does a very similar thing in a narrow scope in an academic space that you want to be in.
I completely agree. I think that's exactly what it aims to do. It aims to be a sort of vanguard liberal arts major. That's the goal. We're trying to be at the sort of bleeding edge of what liberal arts majors do.
Totally.
And I honestly think sometimes when I'm, interacting with students in this particular major, I'm preparing them for work that doesn't even really exist yet. Like jobs that no one's even really conceived of yet, that won't appear until 10 years down the line. And so they're sort of making this path that will then emerge decades from now. And I think that's not for everybody, frankly.
Sure.
But I think for people who kind of are inclined to do, I've got a student right now whose interests are in sort of digital approaches to music promotion. And when you say something like that, I immediately think, okay, well, you're clearly an MCA major, because it's both music, but it's also the promotional business side of music, which involves digital technology, which involves videography. And so that student's aiming to do something down the road that is less, it's the kind of job that doesn't have a job title yet exactly. And so he's setting himself up for a type of work down the line that he himself is defining. And we love that. And I think, it's really exciting, and the major is vibrant, for all those sorts of reasons.
I love that you bring up the point that students are preparing themselves for jobs and experiences that don't even exist yet, because frankly, that's just the truth. And MCA is a young program per se, 4 years old as it stands. So I guess you've already given a snapshot of one capstone, Liza French, MCA major. Podcast was her capstone experience. Are there any other kind of examples that you can give about what students do for that kind of culminating piece within an MCA major?
Absolutely. So I mentioned there were 2 students who initially declared in the major. The second one is Savannah Doobie, and I don't know if you know her at all.
You might know.
Her work as a senior was kind of a heavily theoretically invested approach to comics. And so I've got her comic here. So for her honors project, she did a very kind of sophisticated 25-page theoretical write-up of her own approach to autobiographical comics. So that's a strange combination of things. There is, believe it or not, for those who don't know, there's a strong historical precedent for autobiography in comics. Most notably, I mean, one of the most famous comic writers of the past 30 or so years, Harvey Pekar. There was a film made about him called American Splendor. He was somebody that I was very familiar with and interested in as an undergrad. Savannah went on to write and draw this comic book called Wallflower Moments. And the program ended up having it printed up in a really nice way at the end of the semester. And she's taken this around to various shows and comic book shops and so forth. There's even a map of campus that's drawn up with kind of all these. I can send you a copy of this. And it's actually online. She's got a website where lots of the pages, I think the whole thing is online.
Wow.
And so she did this work as a kind of interesting hybrid between her interest in, obviously, critical theory and comic book writing. And that, to me, is like a perfect example of something that you could do in MCA that's sort of outside the box of any particular program. I mean, there's schools that teach about comics per se, but it's pretty rare to find a fine arts program where, you know, anyone's explicitly saying, oh yeah, you know, you could come into this program and learn about the history, theory, and production of comics. It's right there at the center of MCA. Like, there's a whole week on comics in MCA 101 because that's something I happen to be interested in and know something about. And so I think she just took that experience in MCA 101 and ran with it and came up with this, what I thought was just an absolutely brilliant end product as an honors thesis.
That's awesome.
By the way, you do not have to do, I'm mentioning honors students because I happen to have their projects in mind, and I'm working with some honors students now. Not everybody does honors by any means, and you can still do a capstone project as a senior that's very much along these lines. It would be a shorter project because it's only a one semester course, but yeah.
Sure. No, awesome. No, I think we've got some great information. It seems like a major that it's very interdisciplinary, it's very flexible, it's very kind of student-centric, but also there are guidelines so students aren't completely overwhelmed by all of the possibilities. You know, you stick them in MCA 101, you tell them to think about different mediums that they can, you know, put together. So I think it's got a good balance.
Yeah, no, I definitely think so. And I would say too, you know, one of the real opportunities that students in this major have, especially juniors and seniors, is internships. And so we've had a number of really kind of high tone, impressive internships in recent years. A student of mine, Lucas Fenton, who somebody I kind of came onto my radar as the student who had all sorts of like deep interests and knowledge about hip hop culture, ended up getting a summer internship last year working for a company called Firelight Media in Harlem that made the Miles Davis documentary that's now on Netflix. So if you get a chance to see it, it's excellent. And so he did one internship one summer as a production assistant on the Miles Davis documentary, which kind of perfectly melds his interest in film and music.
Yeah.
And then he worked on the ESPN, the same company did one of the ESPN 30 for 30 for
30s.
He worked on the Michael Vick episode of the 30 for 30 series. And so they basically invited him back for a second internship after the first one went so well. And so that's kind of, I don't know that that's a typical internship, but that's an internship that very much speaks to people's kind of interdisciplinary hybrid interests in MCA.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, we've got a lot of great information. I'm sure everyone who watches this will have learned at least something. I know I did. But I do like to end on a more mushy note, if that's all right with you.
Yeah.
So a lot of admitted students are going to be watching this, you know, prospective students who are thinking about becoming a Clarkie. I'd like to end on one piece of advice for those students. So if you have any advice for admitted students kind of thinking about coming to Clark or going to college, let's hear it.
So this is going to this is actually much more pragmatic. I mean, this is kind of an odd piece of advice that most people don't give, and I wish I would have had when I was an undergrad going into school. And here's the piece of advice. Like, when you pick a college, and especially when you pick a college already kind of sort of knowing areas that you're interested in, it's all about particular professors' areas of expertise. And so it would be kind of like just a mistake to assume that every professor in the visual and performing arts can cover every area of the visual and performing arts. That's just simply not true.
Yeah.
So my piece of advice would be, when you're looking at colleges, actually pull up professor bios, look at especially like the full-time faculty that run programs that are permanently there as part of programs. and look at the work that they do and see if you are interested in the kinds of work that they do, because they're the ones that are kind of determining the course of whatever program that you're going to be part of. And I think that's a really good practical piece of advice. It's especially important for grad students, but I think it's also an overlooked element of what happens at the undergrad level. So like I'll just say quickly, in screen studies, our strong suits are historical and theoretical approaches to genre, that's me, gender studies, that's Professor Sommer. Gohar Siddiqui is deeply invested in Indian cinema, and our filmmaker is especially invested in documentary. So that's not like every area under the sun. Like it's certain specific, I think, really great areas to be invested in, but it's not everything. And so, looking to see what your future professors do professionally is a really good move. And this didn't used to be possible, right? So like when I was an undergrad, you couldn't do this at all because there was no internet. Now you can look it up; it's right there at your fingertips. So that would be my kind of one piece of advice. Sure.
That must be the most authentic advice I've heard from professors yet. And I think I agree. I agree, 100%. And it's something that I might use. So I might take that from you.
Oh, great. Good. Good for you.
Awesome. Well, Professor, thank you for spending time with me today. You definitely get great information, excuse me. And, I hope to do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thanks, Jared. Great talking with you.